Alright, it's a bit dark. There we go. So another video talking about, or attempting to talk about, the most obvious the most obvious thing that there is. But it's not obvious until you recognise it. Until then, it's just a concept. And of course, what I'm talking about isn't a concept, so because of that, you just can't talk about it. You can't describe it. You can't explain it. Which is why it can be frustrating to chase this, because the chase doesn't lead anywhere. It never leads anywhere, and you never arrive anywhere. You never get anything, because it's ungettable, because you never lost it, because you're looking from it. You hear that a lot. You're looking from it. You are it. It's too simple. Too simple. So vaguely, I wanted to just talk about what happened and what led up to this, whatever the fuck this is, what led up to this and what happened. And I've done a number of videos talking about this, but sometimes it's good to relate to the suffering, the struggle, the thoughts, the worries, the pain. And the whole point of this is to tell whoever's watching this, who maybe hasn't had this recognition, that there is an end to all that, and I promise you that that's true. There's an end to it, to all that suffering. It doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to continue like that. Maybe it will, but it doesn't have to. But the difficulty is I can't describe what it is that ends that, what it is that brings about the end of all that. But I can describe what happened to me in the best way that I can and see if it's relatable. And then I can attempt to point towards what happened, using concepts to try and point towards something that is in your experience right now, something that you are experiencing right now, that's too obvious, that's too close, that's too undoubtable. I can point to it, but whether that recognition comes about or not, I don't know what contributes to that really. But for me, it started off with a very existential terror that I repressed a lot and used multiple methods of distraction to divert my attention away from that feeling. And at the core of that was death. At the core of that was the unanswerable question of what the fuck is going on here? Like, what is this all about? What is life all about? Why am I here? What is this? Why is there no answer to that question? Is that not the most obvious question that there is? And then I'm gonna die, so me as I take myself to be will cease to exist at some point, will decay and you know turn into dust and melt into the ground or something like that. And that's a very real prediction, because that's certainly going to happen. And me as I take myself will be no longer. And something about that is just not fucking right. You know, like, why do I have to die? What is it about that that's not right? What is it about that that's so terrifying? I know now, but I didn't know then. And there was just the fear would come up, and it was an existential terror, an existential kind of fear of non-existence, fear of the unknown, fear of the unknowable, and fear of the world. Just a huge amount of fear, huge amount of terror, huge amount of not right. Something's not right about the way I'm experiencing reality. Something's just not right about this. Can you relate to that? And that undertow coloured my experience, sometimes overtly, sometimes subtly, but if I was honest with myself, it was always there. It always came back. It was always in the background. What became depression was me thinking about this. What became depression was me trying to figure this out with concepts and with the mind, and failing miserably. And that sense of powerlessness, knowing that I can't control this. This is beyond me as I take myself to be. Whatever this is way beyond me, and I have no power. No power whatsoever, no say whatsoever. I'll just stick my engine on here. So, the depression, the anxiety, the disordered thinking all came from this existential fear, this sense of not rightness, this sense of something's wrong about this. Something's wrong about me, specifically. And there was a lot of emotion. There was a lot of thoughts seeming to be linked to those emotions, seeming to be kind of intertwined with those emotions. This kind of thought emotion based entity that is me, that is struggling against this problem of life. This problem of life that in a way I know I just can't solve, because I've been trying for, been thinking about this, I've been using reason on this, I've been seeming to combat this for how many years? For me, 33 years, let's say. 33 years of battling against this and getting nowhere. But then what happened? I can't tell you, I can't describe what happened, because what happened is beyond concepts, but I can try and point to it. So that which I described earlier, that apathy, that discontentment, that not rightness, that depression, that fear, all of that is suffering. The suffering was the pull that brought me to this recognition, and it was there for a reason. That question was there for a reason. It was just the natural unfolding of this recognition. And this recognition isn't a gaining of knowledge. This recognition isn't a new thing, a new understanding. Not really. It's not something that you can acquire because you've never lost it. It's not something that you can get good at. It's not like that. It's like nothing we have contended with, or it was like nothing I had contended with in this psychological, emotional battle of life up until this point. That's what's so powerful about it. That's what's so simple about it. That's what's so beautiful about it. That's what's so fucked up about the whole journey in the first place. When you see when this recognition comes in, something else. So something else that I can't even tell you what it is. I can't tell you what it is. That's the point. So something happened. I can describe it in a number of ways, and I have. Any one of those descriptions that I have used in words and concepts is not what I'm talking about. It's what I'm trying to point to, which is what is in your experience right now, undeniably, that is there to be recognised, which isn't the thing, which isn't a concept, which is entirely non-conceptual. Concepts can't touch this. You cannot use the mind to understand this. It's not possible. It's entirely impossible, by definition, let's say. So, as soon as I heard about awakening, enlightenment, and spirituality, as it's kind of cheesily called sometimes, something in me just knew that was the answer to this. If there was an answer, that was it. I just knew it, and never did I doubt that. Never did I doubt that was the answer. In my mind, let's say, something in me just felt that's it. That's the thing. That's the thing. That's the answer to all this shit, all this suffering. So what happened was, this mind entity, this conceptual self, what I take myself to be, came into question. Because I was relating to the world, and I was having these problems. And then I stopped and I thought, what am I that relates to the world that has all these problems? Because I had just been assuming that, this is me. I'm having these problems. I'm relating to the world. These are my problems. What the fuck am I then? Who am I that has these problems? What is the nature of myself? What is... I'm certainly here. Why am I here? What is that? And I knew at that point there was a question that couldn't be answered in the conventional sense. It wasn't a question that I could find a satisfying answer to in the way I had been doing before, through thought. Yeah, this was something different. And I knew about meditation. And I knew that when I had tried meditation before, the mind wouldn't leave me alone. How weird a sentence is that? The mind wouldn't leave me alone. The mind wouldn't shut up. I couldn't get it to stop describing, stop narrating, stop worrying, stop talking, stop giving me pictures and images and so on. I couldn't seem to do that. I couldn't seem to quiet the mind. It didn't seem to be possible. What I was looking for was the answer to this. And I could sense that it was here. I could sense that it was right here in this immediate experience. Not in the future, not in the past. Not what the mind says it is. Not an intellectual or conceptual understanding, but this. There was a mystery to this that became quite fascinating. but I felt a lot of distractions with the mind. I felt like the mind was hanging out bait for me to grab onto, and then leading me away from really looking at what the fuck's going on. What is this? And I came across a self-inquiry, asking I noticed that it's exactly what I had been doing, but there was some guidance there that I found quite helpful. I read this a long time ago actually, so I kind of re-stumbled across it, and it was asking a question like, who am I, or what am I, or what is this, or what I took myself to be was an assumption. I assume I am this body, and I am this discrete entity living inside this body that relates to a separate world out there. Was that the problem? What are you when the mind doesn't describe it? When there are no conclusions at all? When there's no concept? When there's no assumption? When there's no description? I knew there was thought. What knows the thought? What are you that knows the thought? Everything that appears in experience exists, it seems to. Everything that appears in experience is known by you, as in you know your own experience. So what are you that knows experience? This assumption that I am this discrete entity living inside the head that has a narrative, that has a story, is just a thought. It's a thought. Because of course there are periods of time where you're not thinking, but you're still there. What is that? What is that? Explore that. What knows experience? What are you that knows experience? What are you that is aware of this? The more you go into this, the less you can say about it. The more the experience of immediacy, the experience of the knowingness, the awareness, the presence directly in this specific immediate moment became more pronounced, more overt, more fascinating, more interesting, to the point where that fascination, that knowingness, that non-conceptual knowingness, entirely overtook and dwarfed all of the mental narrative, all the conceptual frameworks that made up this entity, this self called me. That's how I can describe it. And at a certain point, people describe it like this. You think you are a separate entity, this discrete entity living inside this body, relating to a separate world. When we turn our attention inwards and explore what we are at our essential level, at some point there's a recognition that what I am fundamentally and undoubtedly is that which is aware, that which knows experience, the knowingness, the awareness. So you're not an entity that has awareness. The awareness is not secondary, the knowingness is not secondary, it's primary. All objects, including the objective self, the mind narrative self, appears within this knowingness. Can you see anything? Can you have any experience? Be careful with the mind here. Can you have any experience that is not known, that doesn't appear inside the awareness of it? What in your experience isn't known, including the thoughts that talk about, the concepts that might pop up? What inside your experience is not known? What in your experience is not present? tempted to give a conclusion to this, but that's not the point. I can describe my own recognition, that I recognise that all experience is known by me. I can't find myself other than the knowingness in which this objective self appears, in which this mind narrative appears, in which all experience appears. Fundamentally, I am the knowingness, which isn't a thing, but also includes, or seems to manifest, all things in this experience. The biggest part of this shift, I'm way over explaining this, right? But I mean, sometimes it's necessary. The biggest part of this shift was recognizing that me that I thought was aware of the thoughts, that the thoughts referred to this subject in this storyline, this me, that wasn't just thoughts, it was a feeling too. It was a deeply felt assumption. Was itself another thought? But a sneaky assumption type thought, a thought that just seems to be the way it is. It's anything that can be an object inside this knowingness is not the knowingness itself, but it's not separate from the knowingness. Any thought you can have appears in and as the knowingness of it. So it is not the knowingness of it, but is also not separate from it. This is quite paradoxical. Hence, just don't go near that shit with the mind. It begins just like an observation, a very subtle, seemingly internal to begin with, observation. If you can close your eyes and watch for the next thought, be aware of the awareness, notice the noticing of the next thought. What will the next thought be? And then just watch, aware, knowing. When the next thought comes, what are you that knows that thought? And are you separate from it? This ends up all sounding very cryptic and philosophical, but it's not. This is a pragmatic approach to self-recognition. And I often don't talk about this, right? Because it's I don't want to give people something conceptual to look for in their own experience, some goal to attain in their own experience. But when this recognition kicked in for me, I didn't know what it was. I knew that something had changed. In retrospect, what had become more pronounced in my experience to a massive degree was my immediate experience, presence, this sensory, visual, auditory thought took on a different quality. There was a quality of unconscious, dreamlike reduction in alertness that comes with the identification with the thoughts. When you believe a thought, you automatically assume that me that the thought refers to is a real thing, is a real discrete entity that lives in here in this body. You give it that power. That's the identification. This recognition is the noticing of that function, that identification. And it's a disidentification from that we took ourselves to be, that I thought I am this thing that's thinking, this separate, discrete entity living in this body that thinks and relates to the world. That's an illusion. That's not real. Certainly feels like the realest thing ever, but when you explore it with authenticity, with honesty, and if you have this massive amount of suffering driving you, for me there came a point where something just changed, and I've described it a million times in this channel. Something just changed, and this is when it's really paradoxical and difficult to describe what changed. I can vaguely describe it like I saw that the me that was creating all these problems relating to the world wasn't real, was transient, was impermanent, was constantly changing, was constantly subject to the conditions of the world. I'm not going to say re-identified with something more vast, something more infinite, because that's a really bad way of putting it, but limitations of language. I recognise myself as something entirely transcendent that's not a thing. I recognise myself as the knowing of it. And where is the knowing of it? Nowhere. Does the knowing of this come and go? Have I ever known it to come and go? No. There goes the fear of death. There goes this existential terror. There goes the question. Irrelevant. Irrelevant. Not because I figured it out with the mind, but because I recognise this undoubtable recognition. To put it into... The mind has an ethereal, ghost-like quality. I mean, its narratives obviously, in comparison to direct experience, aren't real. It's a reflection. This recognition, undoubtable. So take your hand, look at your hand, touch it, feel it. It's there, it exists. Undoubtable. Undoubtable. There's nothing the mind can say about this that's going to change that. Not really. It's the same with this recognition. It's outside doubt. Doubt doesn't apply. Doubt doesn't apply at all. It's just not in that. It's not subject to that. Just trying to drain my car battery here. It's quite dark. It doesn't happen in time, and it doesn't happen at the level of the mind. You don't gain anything. If anything, something stops. The belief, the identification with that narrative, with those worries, with that existential fear, with those questions, just stops. Seeing that was creating the problem, that circuit was the problem. And it didn't have to go on. It could just be let go of. But there's no autonomous entity here that chose to let go of that. It's not like that. It sounds very vague, but I'm just trying to describe it as best I can. What are the qualities of that which knows? If I am that, what are my qualities? It's not a story, it's not a thought. Nothing specific. Doesn't change. Isn't averse to anything. Always here. Always. Not subject to time. Infinite due to the absence of time. Not subject to space or distance. Infinite due to the absence of space or distance. Not separate. Not subject to separation. Because we could say everything appears within it. not an object, not even a subject. Nothing really, but at the same time everything. The mind doesn't even have to be quiet. It doesn't even require that kind of meditation. Trying to quiet the mind, you resist the thought and it makes it worse. It's the belief. It's that fundamental framing, that fundamental belief that I am me, separate here in this world. That these are my thoughts, that these thoughts refer to something real, which is me. Is there any evidence for that? Is there any evidence for you if you don't think about it? Or if you don't believe thoughts? If you don't believe thoughts, anything the mind says, don't believe it. Don't believe it. And we're inquiring, at least anyway. Is there any evidence for this me when I don't believe thought, when I don't use thought to make conclusions, to make assumptions? What can we say about our experience of ourself when we don't describe it to ourselves? That sense of existence, that sense of me, of awareness, of here-ness, of isness or whatever, before it becomes qualified by content or categories or description. What is that? That's the trick. The thought. Become more interested in what a thought is rather than what it says. Like, how do I know that thought? What is that? What is that is aware that knows the thought? What is that is aware that knows this in front of me here? What is that? Can you sense it? Can you sense its qualities? There's something mysterious, something infinite, something powerful about it. Any thought you have about the past or future is known right here by, let's say, you that is aware now. The identification, the following of a thought narrative with belief is a very kind of blinkered experience. It's a very asleep, very unconscious experience. Numbing, numbs the senses, numbs attention. Habitual, repetitive, just happens on its own. What I'm talking about here is like a dilation of attention, like a stepping back almost, and opening up, an expansion. Is it not weird that you can't stop yourself from thinking? Surely if you are an autonomous entity who is in control, you would be able to say, I choose not to think for the next hour. And then you would just, your mind would shut the fuck up for an hour. But it just doesn't work like that. Because these things are based on reactions and conditions and causes, innumerable. Just happens on its own. There's no you in here that's in control, and you can't think your way out of it. It's coming to a standstill, coming to a stop, stopping dead, and then just, let's see, not moving. The recognition will eventually reveal itself. What is this me that these thoughts refer to? Can you find it? Just go right into that. This existential fear comes up. What is that? Go right into that. Where does that come from? Eventually you see the basic assumption that all this separate self is built upon. It's a fundamental duality. Of subject and object. Of I'm here and that's over there. There's no evidence and experience that that's the case, unless you believe the mind. If there's someone who's very mind identified, that's going to sound fucking ridiculous, of course, but to me it's clear. There's no evidence that I'm not over there. There's no evidence that I'm here. That what I am is here and not over there. There's no evidence that I'm separate from the totality of the world, of experience, of this universe. There's no evidence for that. There's no experience of. All there is this. And all of this is what I am, which isn't particularly anything. Anyway, that's a long video. I'm going to have to go now, but that'll do for now, and I'll talk to you next time.